Okay. Now, the last 2 years have been really tough for all of us, and many of us have ended our phone calls to each other saying, see you soon, without really knowing what that soon means. And let's face it, a lot of us are still uncomfortable with this uncertainty of what's to come. The thought that zips past our conscious mind, at least to mine, is where do we go from here? My dear friends, virus is not the only challenge right now. Over the next 30 years, imminent are the editing of genes, of aging populations, of rising sea levels, of climatic changes and human greed for power as we are seeing this today. And the world is moving faster than ever before. So the need of the day is insights, guidance, solutions to a very sustainable and a very equitable and healthy society. Basically, in a nutshell, we need to transform our dying planet into a very thriving ecosystem. And we have to team up with biodiversity for that. And we do need to do it now. So here's a thought. What if we put science and spiritualism both to work to find real solutions to these challenges? And what if this combination allowed us to receive and interpret messages and advice from the future? Sounds amazing, doesn't it? And you would listen to this as well, this advice. I'm sure we all will. Now today, to tap into this wisdom from the future, the present, I bring to you an extremely powerful conversation, almost an apocalyptic chat. So stay tuned as we contemplate on the near and the remote future so that we learn how to surf the perfect wave every single day. A joyful namaste to everyone listening. My name is Minnku Buttar, your host from India, and I'm delighted to welcome you all back to the 13th episode of this talk show, which is inspired from the various facets of my 4-week self-mastery program called the Joyfulness Code. Now, how do I even start to describe my guest speaker today? Perhaps as an emissary of messages from the future, a true catalyst for transforming conversations that lead to social transformation. In this chaotic world, he has this innate ability to help unconventional leaders, social entrepreneurs, and even innovative change makers to connect to their inner guidance. And this helps them to magnify their own gifts, to generate innovative thinking and become their empowered selves. Now, my special speaker today is also a featured author on Biz Catalyst 360 Degrees. He's the creator of Be the Dream, an epic experience. He's podcast host of the One World in a New World. And among his many, many published works, what stood out for me was 0 to 1, Making Our Way Towards a Conscious Civilization. The other one that I loved and I want to access and get my hands on soon is Stubbing My Toe on Purpose. I love that. It's a very seminal view of consciousness, cosmology, and the congruence of science and spirituality. My dear listeners from around the world, with his endearing radical curiosity, courage, humility, and grace, and the most angelic eyes I have ever gazed into, I give you Zen Benefiel.
Oh,
Welcome,
namaste
Zen.
and in la
Namaste.
catch, Minnku. What a beautiful introduction. That's hard one for even me to follow up.
No,
Thank
but
you so much for having me.
Zen, you're so welcome, so welcome. And this is going to be an amazingly powerful takeaways and conversation. And I welcome you here with a very, very heartfelt welcome. Now, Zen, is this your given name? Let's start with that. Let's get our audience to know you a little bit more.
Well, actually, as you might imagine, it is not. However, it depends on who's giving the names, right?
Yeah.
So My life started out very magical to begin with, somewhat chaotic. I was orphaned at birth and adopted, and my adopted sister came home when I was about 4.5. And so this delivery process was a little out of sync. And my parents decided it was time for me to know of my adoption. Now, I already knew there was unconditional love there. I mean, there was no, I was just embraced by it. And yet, once I found out I was adopted, it brought questions. And as Dennis has mentioned, Dennis Patako has mentioned, that I have this radical curiosity. And part of that came initially with these questions of, who am I really? And who's my parents? Do I have a father and mother in heaven? Can I talk to them? And sure enough, but before my 5th birthday, I don't remember the exact date. I was waiting for my dad to come home. It was in the evening. I was looking out across the front porch, had my elbows in the windowsill and my head resting on my hands. And all of a sudden I hear this big booming voice, and it simply says, "Hey, you." And, it startled me, and I thought it was loud enough that my mother should have heard it. She was sitting maybe 20 feet away. And so I spun around and asked her if she heard the voice. And she says, "No, what voice?" I said, "The voice." I said, "Hey, you." She said, "No, I didn't hear a voice. Must have been a peeping Tom." Well, even at that age, I realized that the voice came from inside. And so I learned how to communicate with it simply by standing in front of windows at night with the lights on in the house. So I couldn't see outside. So I was essentially, facing the fear of the unknown. And I would project that same, "Hey, you," out and just simply wait for it to return. Now, of course, that there, and this is kind of the early training on how to still one's mind. Because as long as I was thinking and anticipating and that, waiting, nothing ever happened. But when I got completely quiet and open, then the voice was able to communicate. So this was something I learned very young. So that was how, life began. And then later, I had a very, kind of metaphysically filled childhood, which went up to my teenage years, when I had a cause to question who I am, what I'm here for, and all those kinds of things. I was in my first year in college in a pre-med program. I had an uncle that I really admired, and so I wanted to follow his footsteps. My dad was a machinist at the time, and which I eventually became as well. But in college, I had this kind of a epiphany, I guess, and I hit my knees and I prayed to know what truth was. And I was willing to die for it if necessary.
Oh, this is the near-death experience that you shared with me the other day.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I would love to share that with the audience, because I know that 17% Zen who nearly die have this experience. What was this? Do you even remember vividly what happened on that day?
Oh, absolutely. It's indelible. And it's led my life from that point, because my question of truth and the essence of what that meant for me was knowing what truth is in a larger perspective, and knowing what it is for me in a personal perspective as to what my mission and purpose here is.
Right.
And so in that quest, I'd prayed, and I came back from class one afternoon. It happened to be on a Tuesday. Magically enough, it was also 11/11/1975. So this was before I knew anything about that kind of date, right? And I came back from class, and my normal process was to listen to an album side and meditate, and then move into my homework. So I was living in the honors dorm at the time. And the album I was listening to was Journey's first album, and the second song on it's called In the Morning Day. And it's the whole album is kind of like a soul searching theme, if you will.
Right.
And so I'm laying on my bed, and right in between the vocals and the jam on this particular tune, this voice that I'd been familiar with asked me by my given name, which was Bruce. I'll get to how I got the name Zen.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't forget that, right?
Yes.
So I'm laying there, and this voice says, Bruce, are you willing to die for what you believe in?
That's pretty
And
tall.
I was a bit overwhelmed in the moment. And of course, immediately I thought, okay, what do I believe in? My first thought was Christ consciousness. And I sat with it for an instant, and it felt a little empty. I wasn't sure why. I didn't question it. I moved on to my next thought, which was cosmic consciousness. And that felt full.
Yeah.
So I immediately said yes. And then instantly there's this guitar riff on the album that sounds like a rocket ship taking off. And I feel a tug from my solar plexus at that moment, and I pop out of my body. I'd had plenty of out-of-body experiences before, so it was not uncomfortable at all. And as I popped out, I turned to look at my body laying across my dorm room bed. And then I turned back to look where I was going. And before I could get completely turned around, I was engulfed by white light. It had this effervescent, iridescent, high-pitched sensation with it that it felt like home, right? And then I realized I could think, because I was analyzing the situation. And because I could think, well, then I certainly couldn't be dead. So that was one of the first takeaways, I guess, from it.
Right.
But
So,
as I'm,
yeah.
you had a question about that? You started?
No, please.
Okay.
I'm fascinated. Yeah.
So in this sensation, I found that there was just my thinking and nothing else besides the white light. So the impetuous teenager kicks in, and I'm just thinking to myself at that point, and my question is, wow, is there more? Right? And
Yeah.
I feel a movement, and I'm in a indigo background with points of light surrounding me. And as soon as I began to ask the question of what are these points of light, I knew that they were points of consciousness, whether in body or not, I wasn't sure, because I knew I wasn't. But I had this sense that they were for some reason.
Wow.
And at that point, the voice picks back up again. And it says to me, these are those that you are to work with in order to facilitate a new world order. It will happen in your lifetime. Know this to be true. Your path will be full of trials and tribulations. Have faith and trust that everything you need will be there at its appointed time.
Beautiful.
Trust and allow. And so then there's another rush of energy, and I'm back in my body taking a gulp of air. And I kept my eyes closed for a while, just feeling this, another effervescent feeling is the tingly sensation of being back in my body and just feeling this cosmic consciousness residing in me, right? So
beautiful.
It gave me this understanding that we are all cosmic consciousness condensed into these forms, just not completely aware of it because we have so many layers, of belief systems that keep us from really acknowledging that. Now,
amazing.
That, of course, when I came back, I finally opened my eyes up, and it's like, wow, what the heck just happened, right? So I spent the next several months, pouring through all kinds of different spiritual texts and things, trying to find examples of what I just experienced. And the closest thing was a near-death experience, only this seemed even more than that.
And that is such an incredible Amazing. And the fact that you are in cognizance of every single detail, and then we know how real it was, because it's almost as if it's etched on our memories forever. Because I relate to what you're saying. I have had out-of-body experience, and that's why when we were talking, we've always connected on that level, Zen. In fact, I distinctly remember it was 8 years ago, and I saw myself exactly how you said, with the luminance, and you know that you haven't died because you connect to that and you become a witness. So that is so beautiful, and really congratulations, because I think that propelled you onto your journey.
Oh, absolutely
Yeah,
did.
yeah. And what's
It really
coming?
caused the
It
trials and
does.
tribulations happened early though,
Exactly.
because that,
Yes,
that in a
yes,
sense was understatement.
yes, yes.
So I told my parents about
Uh-huh.
it, and they
Mm.
immediately had me see a psychiatrist.
Oh, oh.
And that sounds kind of intimidating, and yet it was a godsend.
Yeah,
He asked wonderful questions. He listened carefully, and after about the towards the end of the third visit, he says to me, Bruce, you're not crazy. You've had a spiritual awakening, is what I would call it.
oh, yeah.
I don't understand why so young, because
Mm,
most people don't have it until their mid 40s, if they ever do.
that's what I was thinking.
Right.
Yeah, yes.
And so he said that, through the course of things, he said, my advice to you would be not to talk about it a whole lot, because people aren't going to understand you.
Mm, interesting. So then this evolutionary leap that we are talking about, like you said, a trajectory, this leap, that understanding harmony from our deeper self with others, uh, how how do you think this inner vision can fit seamlessly with the outer expressions? I mean, how would you correlate that to someone who's trying to understand something similar?
Well, for me,
Mhm.
and this is how the name came about, right? So initially, I was going through a divorce, had 4 kids, and
Mhm.
um, I don't really want to go into the nasty details, but it was a very traumatic divorce, and
Sorry.
uh,
Yeah.
knowing it was coming, I rented a place with a guest house because I knew I was going to be in it, because I didn't want to leave my kids alone.
Mhm.
So I rented the guest house to a friend of mine, and we'd gone to a full moon meditation together.
Mhm.
This is a male friend, and he and I were sitting in the front of the guest house after the meditation, and we were talking, and our conversation fell quiet, and I closed my eyes and I asked the question, who am I? And I hear his chair move, and I open my eyes up, turned to look at him, and locked on his eyes, and the first words out of his mouth were, you are Zendor.
Oh.
And so, I didn't speak a word,
Mm.
right? And at the same instant, my second sight comes on,
Mm.
eyes still open, and I see this starscape with a huge stone arched doorway and a thick wooden door slowly opening towards me. And I hear, door to what is. And
Wow.
immediately I think, okay, guys, you guys have a really sick sense of humor, right? So I I I shared with him what I just experienced,
Mhm.
and he was accepting of it, because he was actually the founder of a Church of the New Age Spiritual Revolution of America, is what he had at the time. But so I put it on the shelf, didn't talk to anybody else about it, and then a couple of years later, I got the opportunity to produce and host the first round of One World.
Wow.
And so I used my given name, Bruce Benefiel,
Mhm.
and I had a subheading of Zendor, because the theme of the show was
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
interview people from all walks of life, how
Mhm.
they got where they were at, what prompted them to do what they were doing from both inner and outer perspectives,
Right.
what fears they encountered in the
Mhm.
process, how
Mhm.
they overcame them, and how
Mhm.
they saw that fitting in the common human experience around them. So this was my educational process to kind of check in to see how others were going through their own transformative processes so that I could kind of get a bearing and maybe be more helpful with others in the process as well. So about 6 shows in, one of the guys on the set calls me Zen. And it cascaded from there. So that was in 1990.
Thank
And it was
you.
it was a little uncomfortable to begin with, because I had issues with people changing their names when I was in college. So here,
Oh,
that whole axiom, be careful what you judge, because you're going to end up in those same shoes, right?
yes,
So it's exactly what happened. And I finally got comfortable with it. And,
right.
what a blessing in both frames, with both Zendor, and even with Benefiel. Benefiel means good fidelity. And so to have these
Incredible.
gifts given, it was like I was set up from the
Beautiful.
beginning.
Yes, yes, it sounds like it. You've triggered a memory in me, Zen. Minnku was never my, original name. At some point, I'm not going to go into that, but it actually, became Minnku, and then it became 2 N's instead of a single N. And then I was in touch with a beautiful soul, one of my biggest mentors, Swami Dayananda Saraswati Ji, with whom I spent a lot of years. And he gave me another name called Uma, UMA, which means the divine feminine energy, Durga. So I think sometimes you are given names to fuel something in you, and then it's beautiful when you can embrace it. Zen, such amazing. I could just sit and listen to your stories. I have to get my hands on a lot of your books. And you're such a wonderful bridge, such a wonderful builder between science and spirituality. I'm loving your stories, and you've read so many ancient teachings. So my next question to you, given that we are on a cusp of a mutation of humanity, if I can put it like that, and I know you would relate to that, from, say, being biologically natural to becoming a kind of a hybrid of organism and computerization. And so obviously we need to start living in this new awareness that you've been guided to. So from your wisdom, from where you're standing and all that you imbibe and all that you've been guided, what are some of the practical and very pragmatic ways that we can apply to daily lives so that it helps us navigate complexities? What would you suggest a normal human does?
Well, first of all, we need to practice being a good human, right? So, which means care and compassion towards one another.
Absolutely.
Now, on the other, from both a spiritual and scientific standpoint, we have to understand who we are, how we're made, what the constructs are.
Right.
And science is showing through quantum physics that we're basically a series of layers of electromagnetic energy, right? And so that energy has frequency, which then can attune itself to what we have loosely called natural order, and that each of us essentially has a perfected form, fit, and function in that natural order, right? Like tapestry, like threads in the tapestry of the universe, if you will.
Yeah.
And we each have that. We are each in various stages of development of it. And through this shift now that we have, let's say from a cosmic standpoint, the solar system has moved into a new area of space, which has a subtle shift in the vibratory rate. Now, we as subtle energy beings are affected by that, whether we realize it or not. Now, the aspect of consciousness and becoming aware of those kinds of influences then allow us to kind of practice what the indigenous folks call the first brain activity, which is the gut, right? We feel things in our solar plexus. That's where energy is connected. And that's, the seat of the will,
right,
is what it's called. Well, whose will, right? Is it our will, or is it thy will be done? And what's thy will? Well, that would be natural order as it was created to be. So we're designed to fit perfectly together in harmony. with each other, the cosmos, and the planet. And we're just now becoming aware of how intricately crafted, I'll put it that way, that these things are, and that what once used to be called living in spirit is now being termed as living in quantum entanglement in the unified field, because we have the consciousness to be aware of that and to pay attention. Now, how does that show up? Well, oftentimes that shows up by simply asking questions and putting it on pause and waiting for those answers to come in how our life unfolds. And that happens through synchronicities often, right? Where we ask for something and all of a sudden our attention is then pulled toward something without us even knowing it. And then all of a sudden we become aware of, oh, here's my answer, right?
Absolutely.
Now, those initial answers have a certain cursory approach to begin with. And then as we begin to become aware, we can drill down into those answers with better questions and then understand our ability to perform at peak within those. And that's whether it's in relationships, in family dynamics, in business, in education, all of those kinds of things. These are all systems that have a design within them to work together, right? So now we're in this aspect or this process of figuring out what the agility factors are to be able to step into that from very basic, simple levels, like being a good human. Okay, so how does that work from a corporate standpoint? How does that work from a company standpoint? How does that work from a community standpoint? How does that work from a municipal standpoint? And all these systems are so well integrated that you and I, we don't even question them anymore. We just go about our lives and you know, we go to the store, we, you know, buy clothes, we buy groceries, we interact with friends and neighbors and whatnot without even, because we're safe, right? Now, there are some aspects in the world that occur right now, especially over the last couple of years, where we haven't felt safe, where we've even been encouraged to fear each other. And now, you know, we're addressing some other opportunities of this, you know, idea of being a good human and not being aggressors, right? And then we have to look at, okay, where's the aggressing coming from and why? And be able to step back and just observe that initially, and then work together in mass to put a stop to it, right? Which is where the power of the people come in. And we've been neglecting that power.
Yeah, absolutely. That is awesome. It's almost as if, you know, if our listeners are listening to this and when they do, it's almost as if, Zen, you've handed them a quantum miracle accelerator, if I can call it that. I have no idea where that word comes from, but I love that.
That was a quantum dump.
No, it's like, how do you accelerate? And, you know, the theme for today is where do we go from here? And quite interestingly, Zen, when, you know, we decided that, you know, I said, this is what we're going to call our theme today. And I was doing my research, as I always do. And I had Martin Luther King Jr., he wrote about where do we go from here? He talked about chaos and community all the way in 1937. Then there was, I don't know if you've heard Jim Reeves, you know, he wrote this beautiful, where do I go from here? And he says, what fate is drawing near, touch my heart and guide my lips in prayer. Through the grace of God alone, I'll cast aside these fears I've known and lift myself from the depths of deep despair. I absolutely love that. And you encapsulated all that and so much more today, Zen. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for that. And after that crescendo, it's time to chill. without a pill. I love how that
No,
rhyme
no chill
goes.
pill necessary. I thought you had some other question. I know my answer may have gone a little bit.
No,
uh,
I just absolutely think, Zen, you've encapsulated. I had presented a few other things, but in keeping with, our time,
Time.
it is amazing. Actually speaking, you have covered it all, because I know that you bring this value in the sessions that you do for corporates, the way you work with individuals. There was also something I wanted to talk about, and I'm not sure if we have the time, because we do need to go into the rapid fire, but just maybe briefly, I love what you talk about, the multi-plane awareness technique with solfeggio's frequency.
William Swigard's work.
Would you like to touch on that briefly? Because that's something special that you do, right?
Absolutely. And I actually created an audio version of it because there wasn't one.
Okay.
And if your viewers look up multiplane and solfeggio,
Yeah.
on the whatever search engine, the video that comes up at the top is one that I created for that. It's about an hour and a half long,
Okay.
but it's a guided process. And what that process does is it takes the participant through a series of planes of consciousness, 9 of them, which allows you to integrate with your body on each one of those planes of consciousness.
Right.
I mentioned the electromagnetic spectrum earlier. So consider that as a series of bandwidths, and each one of those bandwidths has an operational consciousness in it that you have access to. All of us have that. That's how we're constructed. Nepi and Close have a TDVP model called the Triadic Dimensional Distinction Vortical Paradigm, which is a quantum physics model that also echoes that same. William Swigard's work was from the 1950s. Nepi and Close's work was published in 2010 and also talks about consciousness, space, and time being tethered across 9 dimensions. So here's another reference. Now you have a way of actually personally experiencing that. And nothing else matters until you can experience something.
Right. That's important, information there. And this is available. Where can someone find this? And this is
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. Okay.
It's on YouTube. It's always free.
I am definitely going to put that when this we publish and put this interview out there. Zen, if you're ready to move from that absolute crescendo to chilling, let's go into the rapid fire. And I don't know if you've watched any of the other episodes before. These are 1 sentence, 1 word, spontaneous answers. So have fun. You are in the driver's seat. So if you're ready, 4 or 5 questions from the heart. Should we start?
I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm game. Just don't shoot me.
Not at all. Not at all. The world needs you. Otherwise, how will we know where to go? So, if you were allowed to grow 1 vegetable in your garden, what would that be?
Ooh, jalapenos.
Sorry?
Jalapenos.
Oh, that's incredible. For a minute, I thought like, oh my God, this is Zen from India with that fiery palate. Where's that coming from, Zen?
The jalapenos, I love to put them in everything. Just the flavor, the spice, the antioxidants, all the things that are contained in it.
You have to come visit me in India, and I will make sure your fiery palate is indeed fulfilled each day. The next one for you, Zen, coming up. What does a typical day for your future self look like?
Ooh, communicating with others around the world on the similar topics of how we're building a collective organization together.
Beautiful. I think this is the kind of conversations we are not having, and we need to have more of. Now,
I'm actually having them already with liveandletlive.org.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
That's amazing. I'm just going to make sure I'll get that and mention that for our speakers.
Sure.
Now,
Just kind of drop that in out of nowhere, right?
Yes, we will in part of, whenever we put this out there. Consciousness to you is ?
Being in a perfected form, fit, and functional capacity.
Well, I like that. I like that. I'm going to listen to that again and go back and listen to that because that was pat on. Beautiful. Thank you, Zen. That's it. I mean, you sailed through those. Usually I come up with, maybe 10, but I think keeping in mind that we've had this wonderful wisdom and conversation before. Thank you, Zen. This is a stellar conversation. And this episode will be out on the 1st of March, 2022. And in the meantime, knowing that you are such an amazing co-creator and facilitator of intuitive insights on strategies, on processes, and you are helping individuals work groups to align themselves to, what do I say, peak performance paths. Where can people reach out to you? LinkedIn, sorry?
I said sense making.
Sense making.
That's basically what it all is.
That's absolutely, and it's right there. It just needs the facilitation to just move people along in the right direction.
We feel good sense.
Yeah, I think so.
There's no question in that. When good sense is spoken, that truth is resonant. We feel it in our entire being, and it just relaxes us to be able to move into it.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you on that. That's the space I think we both operate from. Now, is LinkedIn the best place to get in touch with you?
Oh, that's one of the places, absolutely. I have several websites, BeTheDream.com,
right,
teampartnering.com, and even ZenBenefiel.com.
Okay, thank you.
And of course,
so
I'm on
much.
Facebook too.
Yes, thank you so much, Zen. I hope you had a good time here on this talk show with me.
Oh, I did, Minnku. This is, one of the rare opportunities to have this deep a conversation with someone who is right there with me. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing and making this available. And I so appreciate that from the depths of my being.
Thank you, Zen. Completely with you. In any dimension, we are working together to a collective consciousness, and I think every drop that we put out there in the sea is going to matter. And just understanding these conversations, where do we go from here? Thank you. Join me to say goodbye to our audience and to everyone out there. Please, this goes on to the YouTube, like, subscribe, press that cute bell icon so that you get the wisdom from all my speakers on the 1st and 15th of each month. Bye-bye now. Namaste.
Namaste and in la catch.
Thank you. Love to the world. And thank you, Zen. Take care. And may the force be with you.